so often, suffering and pain seem to be what someone else is dealing with, right? Especially when it comes to really, really big things like natural disasters, the forest fires out on the West Coast seemed far away, didn't they? But then we learned Debbie's sister lost everything in one of those fires. Everything, house burned down, everything gone. Her son Andy's, one of his close friends, lost everything. And so suddenly it's like, wow, those are people we know. Not just having a little bit of damage, but losing everything. And so it kind of hits close to home. It gets a little bit personal. And it feels like the last couple months, that has happened more and more, where things that seem to be, someone else's problem have become ours. And those struggles and that pain and all of that suffering that we're seeing in the world seems to be just kind of coming to us through Facebook and through our Instagram and through all these news outlets and all this stuff all the time. And so how do we deal with it? How do we deal with pain? How do we deal with suffering? So for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be looking at this series called You Can't Handle This. Because when it comes to pain and suffering, isn't that the question? Why? Lee Strobel, who you may have read some of his books, was an atheist, right? And a lawyer, and set about to try to disprove God through scientific means and study, and wound up becoming a believer. In fact, one of the most outspoken believers. And he did a survey, kind of a national thing, and found out that the number one thing that people wanted to ask God was, why is there pain and suffering in the world? Right? It just doesn't make sense. God is love and he cares about us, and so why do these things happen? And it's not enough, is it, to say to someone who's lost everything, to someone who's lost someone that they love, to say, hey, you're going to be okay, everything's going to work out. Because right at that moment, things ain't working out. Oh, this too will pass. Well, right now, in the middle of it, it feels like it's too much. And very often what we'll say, and if you've ever said this, and I've thought it and said it myself, I've said, well, the Lord never give us more than we can handle. And I'm convinced that anytime I've said that to somebody, they have said, really? Because right now it feels a whole lot like way more than I can handle. And so I began to realize, like maybe that's not right. Maybe we should be telling people, yeah, you can't handle this. This is way more than you were ever designed to shoulder and to deal with. And so what we're going to look at is maybe a better way, a different way to look at that. Because the reason why we say that is we don't want that person to feel overwhelmed, do we? We want them to have strength. We want them to be encouraged. We don't want this thing to sort of, just destroy them. And I get that. But wouldn't it be better to just say, yeah, this is too much? But we know that God can handle it. See, that's the point that we're going to make. And so let's look at that first part, that God gives you more. And that's probably the part that I probably have the biggest trouble with. That God would send me something bad. Just seems so contrary to who he is. He's love, right? He cares about us. James says that he is the one, like all things come from him. All good things come from the Father of lights. We were just talking about that in a Bible study. We were just unpacking that passage. The good stuff comes from him. All the bad things, the things that destroy us, the things that cause us to sin are not from him. He doesn't tempt anybody. And so I can't say, well, God, you gave me this. Now, again, there's multiple sources. Sometimes, I got to be honest and say my own pain and suffering sometimes comes from my own choices. When I choose not to trust God, when I choose to go down that wrong path, and I'm where I'm not supposed to be, when I'm not supposed to be there, and something bad happens, that's on me. But there are things, right? There's disease and other things that maybe we had nothing to do with. Maybe it was genetic. Maybe it was something that just happened. The thing is, we always want a cause and effect, don't we? We want to blame something. We want to have an enemy. We want someone that we can say, oh man, it's your fault. But sometimes, and this is a bitter truth and a difficult one, is that we live in a fallen world. And sometimes I know for myself, that's all I've got to go with. When something just makes no sense, when I do a funeral for a little one, right, where the casket is this big, and my heart's breaking, and the family's heart's breaking, and I'm like, okay, this just makes no sense. I find comfort in knowing that the Lord sees it that way too. This is not how things were supposed to be. And it goes back to what we read in Genesis 3. Because over and over again in Scripture, you see that the author of lies is not God, but it's the devil. And I want to say this right at the beginning, that this is not, I don't want you to go home and go, well, Pastor said the devil made me do it. So I'm just going to do stuff, and I'm just going to say, oh, it was the devil. Okay, please. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, I want us to see, because where do snakes hide? I have a great big wood pile in the back, and I've been slowly using it for my fire pit. And I'll be going back there to get some stuff, to get some kindling or get some sticks. And my wife will say, hey, watch out for snakes, because there's snakes back there. Snakes hide, don't they? What I want to do with this series is let's kick them, let's get them out so we can see them and see how God takes care of them. Because I think the devil doesn't want us to see that he's behind most of these things, or at least that it's a consequence of something that he caused someone to do. Because it wasn't God, right? Because God had made everything. He made everything perfect. It was beautiful. They had this beautiful relationship with God. Just an awesome thing. And they had one rule. I know I say that every time I preach on this passage, but it's just so amazing. Could you imagine a life where you only had one rule? Just one. Everything else is just awesome. You never have to worry about anything. There's no dinner schedule. You're not having to worry about whether the grocery store has what you need. There's none of that. You go out and you pick dinner. You pick breakfast, right? It's just right there. It's all right there. Beautiful relationship with your wife and your husband. I mean, that's just harmony, and it's awesome. And with God, it's just incredible. And then the serpent slithers in, right? And he's like, hey, did God actually say that you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? He wants her to question God's goodness. The details of what he says. And the woman says, well, we can eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. Yeah, we're good with that. But there's one that we're not supposed to eat from. Right in the middle. If we even touch that, we're going to die. She's real serious about it. So she knows what the deal is. Got to dial that in. That's the only rule. Don't touch that tree. Don't eat that tree. You're going to die. Death will come. He says, you're not going to die. Right? Isn't that what the devil whispers to us? You're fine. Jesus died for you. You could do that. You're forgiven. How cool is that? He knows, in fact, when you eat that, your eyes are going to be open. You'll be like him. You'll know good and evil. Something that I don't believe we were meant to shoulder. Because I don't know about you, but I will often have a sliding scale with what's good or bad. Human beings do that. We were not meant to be judged. We were not meant to, right? We were meant for freedom and all that. That was what we were supposed to have. But here it happens, right? They eat the fruit because she rationalizes it in her mind. All right, there's God's rule and it's what he wants me to do, and he wants me to have a great life, but she throws it away because it looked good. It seemed good. The devil even used the goodness of God against her. And they eat, and she gives some to Adam. Their eyes are open, and they knew they were naked. That had never occurred to them up to this point. And they begin to sew fig leaves together, and they make themselves loincloths, which I know makes us chuckle a little bit, and like, how silly is that? But we do the same thing, don't we? When we're faced with our nakedness, when we're faced with our guilt and our shame, we find ways to cover it up, ways to make it look a little bit better. That's the problem. And it says they heard the sound of the Lord walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord among the trees of the garden. That's the world we live in. That's why there's pain. That's why there's suffering. Because these trees that were a source of life for us are now the way that we hide. Did you catch that? It was once this place where we can go and eat and be filled and have all this stuff. And now it becomes shelter in a way to hide, and a place to hide from God. The one whose voice I am sure the day before he didn't have to find them, and they weren't afraid of him. Do you see what sin does? Do you see what this fall does to our relationship with God? I mean, that's brutal. That's tragic. That's about the saddest thing we will ever have to deal with in our lives. And what happens is that does a number on and really destroys their relationship with each other. Because Adam says, hey, I heard the sound of you. I was afraid. I was naked and I hid. And he goes, who told you were naked? Verse 11. You ate from the tree, didn't you, right? Have you eaten of the tree? No, he doesn't say, did your wife eat from the tree? Did you eat from the tree? And this is why this should not surprise us when we have a hard time being honest as human beings. But why that brings a ton of suffering in our world. We shouldn't be like, wow, where's that coming from? Because the very first one, right, Adam, didn't say, yes, Lord, I did. It was me. No, what did he say? He blames God. It was that woman that you put here to be with me. And if she wasn't here, I mean, that's what he's saying, isn't he? You don't put her here, everything goes totally different. I would have stood like a man and said, not today, Satan. Right. He had every opportunity to say no, but he didn't. And he turns to her, what have you done? She passes the buck too, right? It was that serpent. He deceived me. And so I ate. So the Lord curses the serpent, right? You're gonna crawl around in your belly the rest of your day. You're gonna eat dust all the days of your life. And what happens is, in the midst of suffering, we can see, okay, this is the world, right? This is what was dialed in. Death brought into the picture now, and with everything that entails, sickness, disease, dishonesty, hatred, bitterness, all of these things are gonna happen. No longer harmony with God, no longer this beautiful relationship with each other and with Him. But what helps us in the middle of suffering is that God didn't leave it there, did He? Even there, He has this promise in verse 15. He says, look, there's going to be war, strife. There's going to be this battle between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. So when we look at the issues in our life, I mean, that's where it starts. This is like God throwing down, isn't it? He's like, it's on. All right, dude, you want to play? I'm going to show you because God wins, not the devil. He doesn't get the last say. He doesn't get the last word. He doesn't get to win. And since then, the devil has been winning all these battles, these little battles, thinking he's won the war, but he hasn't. He has lost. Jesus has already given his life. He has already made good on this promise. Look at that last verse. He's going to bruise your head. He's going to crush your head. Yeah, you're going to bruise his heel. But what happens when you step on a snake? He might get you. But your foot comes down, and he's done. Right? Just like those lantern flies that you like to crush. Right? We're stepping on those nonstop. Saying, yeah, you're gonna hit him. You're gonna inflict a deadly wound. You're gonna put him on a cross. And he's going to take, and it's going to seem like you've won. It's going to seem like, as he takes all of the guilt and shame of the world, that yes, it can't get any worse than this, can it? The devil's victory can't get any bigger than this. He's saying, yeah, that's what you're going to think as you see him suffering. But it's one of the, I think it's probably the greatest line in any psalm that's ever been written. It says that death has been death's undoing. His death is death's undoing. His dying is the end of this battle. It's Jesus winning this war. Because what happened? They put him in a grave. Did the grave hold him? Not at all. So in the middle of suffering, maybe we could say like, hey, remember that grave? Remember Jesus coming out of that grave? Remember Easter morning? Remember the victory over death and the grave that we preached about on Easter? And we need to get back to that. And say in the midst of suffering, that's true. That victory is there. We can even face death and say that he has won. And we can be real honest and say, I can't handle this. I should be honest with you and say, you can't handle this. You can't handle death. You can't handle pain. You can't handle all this suffering. You never meant to. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't hang in there, right? That we don't ask God for strength. It doesn't mean that we don't battle it out. But he's won the victory already. And if I'm honest, and if we're honest with ourselves, we can't handle this. That's what God wants us to say. Why? Because he has handled it already. He's already won the victory. He has already taken care of sin, death, hell, and the grave. Right in here, everything that he said would happen has happened. Yeah, the devil got his best shot in. But little did he know that death means he's done. Means he's done. And I pray that preaches loudly every moment of your life, every time you're dealing with suffering, every time you're dealing with pain, you're trying to figure out what does this mean? Well, it means that God's in control. It means that God's with me. It means that this life is not what it's supposed to be, and this world is not what it's supposed to be. And so we long for that day when he comes again. We long for that day when he comes and he makes everything right, and that day is coming. So we hold on to him, knowing, hey, I can't handle this. But my Father's with me, and he can. So let's go to him and let's confess our sins.